Boa noite. Para que serve a filosofia? Ele diz que serve para prevenir catástrofes e para fazer ver as coisas de outra maneira. E é de uma maneira diferente que ele se destaca no debate da cultura contemporânea e na análise crítica dos desafios políticos do mundo. Diz que o capitalismo é indestrutível e provoca, com essa esquerda que está aí, quem precisa de direita. O Roda Viva entrevista hoje o filósofo e psicanalista Slavoj Žižek, professor da Universidade de Ljubljana, da Eslovênia, e diretor internacional do Instituto de Humanidades da Universidade de Londres. O filósofo Slavoj Žižek tem uma maneira singular de fazer ligações entre história da filosofia, crítica cultural e política. Especialista em Jacques Lacan, o principal seguidor de Freud, Slavoj Žižek também se tornou conhecido entre os cinéfilos. Ele é um especialista em Hitchcock. Como filósofo e crítico da cultura, ele escreve para várias publicações de prestígio no mundo, inclusive no Brasil, onde retornou recentemente para lançar o seu último livro, A Visão em Paralaxe.
A Visão em Paralaxe. Na orelha do livro, a explicação de paralaxe. Medida da mudança de posição aparente de um objeto em relação a um segundo plano mais distante, quando esse objeto é visto a partir de ângulos diferentes. Um fenômeno óptico, onde os objetos parecem sair do lugar quando mudamos a posição de observação. Žižek aborda a atualidade a partir de uma paralaxe, de uma divisão dos pontos de vista como o fato necessário para a defesa de uma posição, de uma ideia. Navega pelos mais variados cenários intelectuais, da teoria social para a crítica da cultura, da teoria do cinema para o marxismo, a psicanálise e a política. Slavoj Žižek nasceu na cidade de Ljubljana, na Eslovênia, em 1949. É filósofo, psicanalista e um dos principais teóricos contemporâneos. Viveu na juventude e na vida universitária o ambiente político criado pela formação da República Socialista Federal Iugoslava. A Eslovênia, vizinha da Áustria, era uma das 6 repúblicas da antiga Iugoslávia. Se tornou independente em 1991, quando Žižek, aos 42 anos de idade, já ganhava evidência no cenário intelectual da União Europeia. Nome presente no debate sobre a desintegração dos Estados socialistas, ele também levou suas teses e críticas ao universo do cinema, do feminismo, da religião e da política. Ligado a um movimento de minorias organizadas em Ljubljana, uma das mais bonitas capitais europeias e de vida cultural intensa, Žižek chegou a ser candidato à presidência da República pelo Partido Liberal Democrático Esloveno. Perdeu a eleição e se dedicou integralmente à carreira acadêmica, se tornando também um especialista em Jacques Lacan, o principal seguidor de Freud. Slavoj Žižek dá aulas na Universidade de Ljubljana. Também é professor visitante em várias universidades norte-americanas, Columbia, Michigan, Princeton, e tem vários livros publicados. Em Bem-vindo ao Deserto do Real, pergunta: com essa esquerda, quem precisa de direita? Uma crítica ao pensamento de esquerda criado a partir dos ataques de 11 de setembro de 2001 nos Estados Unidos. Às portas da Revolução é uma reunião de textos de Lenin, uma nova leitura da Revolução Bolchevique e de seu líder teórico. O livro mais recente, A Visão em Paralaxe, é uma combinação de alta cultura com drama cotidiano. Um conjunto de análises e críticas, muitas vezes apresentadas com humor e ironia. É considerado o mais importante trabalho teórico de Slavoj Žižek.
Jack, eu vou fazer 2 perguntas para você que estão relacionadas com as suas respostas no primeiro bloco do programa. Eu tenho pensado muito nos últimos dias na história enquanto espetáculo, porque a gente tem ouvido e acompanha as críticas e as defesas do modelo da ordem econômica global. Então isso está se passando nos últimos anos, com apoiadores e detratores, enfim, com um debate em torno disso. Mas o que se viu nos últimos dias foi um processo muito rápido, começando por Wall Street, depois se espalhando por outros lugares do mundo, em que símbolos de solidez, né, supostamente de solidez, e o caso mais emblemático é o Lehman Brothers, da noite para o dia viram símbolos de vulnerabilidade. Então, me parece que isso é muito impactante. Há um sistema financeiro em xeque, que pode desordenar o sistema econômico, mas evidentemente eles estão procurando os próprios antídotos no meio dessa confusão toda. Então, a primeira pergunta é, diante deste espetáculo que a história está nos proporcionando, você acha que é um momento de reavaliação da lógica capitalista ou isso vai ser um episódio efêmero e o capitalismo vai continuar o seu curso? Segunda questão. Eu acho muito interessante quando você traz a discussão sobre tolerância, ou seja, o conceito de tolerância embutindo uma mistificação. E aí eu pergunto para você o seguinte... Isso tem a ver com a falha das políticas ecumênicas no campo religioso? Ou seja, também o ecumenismo, o discurso do ecumenismo também é mistificador? São as duas perguntas.
Very nice questions. The first one, of course, I think we should use this crisis as something that will enable us to question the fundamentals of capitalism, and I think ultimately the game cannot go on indefinitely. Here again I remain a Marxist. I think we will have to find a way not simply to abolish capitalism but nonetheless to somehow get over it, not to treat it as the ultimate horizon of our social existence. But nonetheless, you know what always fascinated me is this incredible, how should I call it, plasticity of capitalism. The problem with capitalism is that it's in a crisis from its very beginning. If you look even before the French Revolution, there were crises, there were prophets of doom claiming, oh, this is the end. From somewhere, I would say, late 18th century, there are prophets who claim capitalism is nearing its end. Then Marx thought maybe French Commune is the end. Lenin thought it's the end. Mao thought it's the end. But the problem is, the more capitalism is disintegrating, rotting, and so on, it's like that stupid bird, phoenix. The more it returns. Again, my point is not it's indestructible, we are doomed to it, and so on. But we just should really be aware of this infinite plasticity. Like some leftists put their hope very masochistically into a big ecological catastrophe. Like if something really horrible happens, like, I don't know, global warming, big earthquake, whatever, we will have to impose some collective, more collective logic. I claim not necessarily. I can well imagine with global warming, capitalism quickly reinventing itself, and it's already happening. I was told that now with this prospect of the ice on the Arctic melting down in 1 or 2 years, so that it will be possible to have direct North Passage, boats going directly from China through the North Pole to United States. You know that they are already buying real estate on Arctic, up there on Greenland and so on. So let's not trust this, it will not be that simply because of some external crisis it will collapse. I still remain here a Marxist. I claim that what is much more destructive in the sense of threatening to capitalism is the fact, which was already foretold by Marx, that the core of, let's call it productivity, inventiveness, is moving to what we refer to as intellectual property. And I think here capitalism is encountering its limit. It's getting more and more difficult to force, to trap intellectual productivity, computer programs, whatever, all this immaterial production into the form of private property. Let's not forget that the recent crisis that we have now is originally the crisis of intellectual property. You know what happened in 2001 or 2? There was first this so-called digital meltdown, the crisis of all this digital intellect, and in order to prevent global economic crisis, American government tried artificially to redirect investment from that into real estate, housing, and then it failed here. So intellectual property, which is totally an inherent problem, not an external threat to capitalism, is, I think, a much more threatening phenomenon. Let's take a person like Bill Gates. The very fact that a person who was 30 years ago nobody, okay, doing some playing in his garage, and then in 20, 30 years you become the most rich man in the world. Isn't this a proof that you cannot even pretend that market value in any way reflects some real productivity, real achievement? Market works totally pathologically here. Even a conservative American economist with whom I was in debate used a wonderful metaphor. He told me that if the standard market movement with its ups and downs is like, you know, when you go to a doctor to check your heart, EKG, EKG, that market with intellectual property, it's like a heavy heart attack, as they put, you know, up, down, all this points towards a very deep crisis. So it's clear more and more with all this that it's not simply market and state regulation. And then all these liberal pseudo-debates, to what extent should the state intervene into market? Market cannot survive without state intervention. The paradox is that, for example, you remember that a couple of years ago, United States prosecuted Microsoft against monopoly and so on. This is for me a wonderful paradox. It means that the state has to intervene so that market survives. Market spontaneously would long ago have abolished itself. Here I see imminent threats to capitalism. So yes, definitely we should bear in mind this logic, how to put it, the end of capitalism, but not in this naive way of this will be the final crisis or whatever. But we should... Second question, yes, which was tolerance and...
Ecumenismo.
Ecumenismo. I totally agree with you here. I would go even a step further. Today's predominant spirituality, this is why I like to defend in my work Christian legacy, to avoid any misunderstanding. I'm 1000% atheist. No, I'm not playing any return of God, post-secular thought. What interests me in Christianity is the social form of organization that it implies. Christianity is for me the first fully atheist religion. The message is, God is dead, everything depends on us. Us is Holy Spirit, which means ultimately the Communist Party, if you want, collectivity. Without any guarantee in God. For me, the message of Christ's death is not, I will save you, is, as many intelligent theologists said, the message of Christianity is not, God will save us. It's not, we can trust God, but God is impotent without us. That is to say, it's all on us. It's this logic of active, collective action. Collective activity. Against this, here I come to your point. I think that, to put it in abstract terms, this spirituality, which fits perfectly today's global capitalism, is something like some vague pseudo-Dalai Lama Orientalist spirituality. Now I will even establish the link between your first and second question. Do you know that some kind of vague Buddhism is extremely popular, I read, among those speculative capitalists? Because for them it covers precisely the phenomenon you mentioned in your first question, this utter fragility, like today up, then everything can collapse and so on. And you know, there is a whole school of Zen capitalists, they call themselves, which claim, you see, capitalism is the ultimate proof that our description of reality, as you know, the curtain of Maya, all reality is fragile, pseudo-reality, things do not really exist, they are just phenomena. This perfectly covers this, as it were, ontological experience of late capitalism, where you have bubble, it explodes, there is no substantial reality, and so on and so on. So for me, to put it in brutal terms, in religious terms, the struggle would be between materialist Christians and New Age spiritualists. New Age spiritualism, even if it's covered as green, tolerant, ecumenic, that's the enemy today. That's the voice of wisdom, depoliticization, the voice of... Why? The voice of what? What's the message of this spontaneous Western... You know, people once spoke about Western Marxism. I like to speak about Western Buddhism as this spontaneous Orientalism. It's life, economy is just a game. Don't take it seriously. Withdraw, observe the world as a game. But that's the only way to survive. Capitalism is so dynamic that you need this cynical or ironic, whichever way you put it, distance to survive. Which is why, did you notice another thing? Even those new materialists, and this is an interesting phenomenon today, for the first time that I remember in the United States, brutal materialism, like Richard Dawkins, Dennett, and so on, became acceptable as the mainstream. But if you look closely at their work, they always make an exception. They say, but Buddhist meditation is different. This is just a spirituality which doesn't involve any wrong epistemological statements. It's a pure self-experience, and so on and so on. Again, this is for me the enemy today. Which is why, again, I think that we should save not Christianity as a religion, but, how should I put it, the form of social engagement which was the first time formulated with Paul in this logic of the community of believers, this, how should I put it, fighting collective based on fight, a struggling collective. There is something unique which is worth saving in Christian legacy, against, as you said, this poor ecumenism.
Professor.